is the Truth with John Gordon. Assaulting the narrative. Destroying the lie. Unearthing the truth.
I want the truth!
This is the Truth with John Gordon.
Welcome to this week's edition of The Truth. We've got a lot to talk about today, including the assassination attempt on President Trump, President Trump's campaign going after Kamala Harris, Tim Walz and J.D. Vance, a contradiction in military service, and then Nikki Haley came out earlier this week and gave the Trump campaign some sage advice. So with the assassination, we continue to look into it and study everything that we can get our hands on. I've now come down to the conclusion that Crooks acted alone in terms of being the shooter. Now, I don't believe that he acted alone in terms of planning this, and I say that for about four good reasons. One, he took up the position on that AGR building that is now world famous, and he went to the spot that is the only spot in the complex where he could have done his mission without being readily detected. A tree blocked the vision of the Secret Service snipers on the north side of Trump, and the Hercules snipers on the south side were assigned to looking due west and southwest. So they were not focused on that particular section of roof. The local law enforcement who were in a building behind the building one, the one that Crooks took up position on, did not have a vantage point from which they could have seen Crooks had they even been at their duty stations, which we now know they were not. So certain questions remain, and we're going to talk about this in depth in just a little bit with Alex Newman. He is CEO of Liberty Sentinel Media, a journalist, author, and educator, one very smart individual. We're going to talk about the questions that remain, like who gave the order for the Secret Service sniper not to shoot? They had Crooks in their sights for a minute and 10, 15 seconds before Crooks shot. Why did they not at least fire a warning shot over his head if they thought that there was a possibility that he wasn't there to do harm? Or they could have disabled him. But no, they let him take off 8 rounds of ammunition before they decided to take him out. Who visited Crooks from Washington, D.C. and Gallery Place, where the Secret Service, the FBI, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms all have offices? The Heritage Foundation did a study of Crooks's residence. They geofenced it, and then they traced back people who visited the house in the month before the attempt on Trump's life. And someone from Washington, D.C., and particularly Gallery Place, visited him at least twice and possibly 3 times leading up to the assassination attempt. Who was it? We need to know. Why did they leave the building unprotected? Why did they not include the AGR building as part of the protection for the rally? These are questions that need to be answered. But to my amazement, I shouldn't say to my amazement, it's totally predictable, totally believable, but it is still amazing that Trump is continuing to campaign. He held a rally earlier this week in Asheville, North Carolina. He has had a series of interviews that he's conducted from Mar-a-Lago, a press conference that all the members of the media were invited to attend, and he stood and answered questions and handled all the tough questions from all the mainstream media. Yet Kamala Harris is still yet to have a press conference, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. So then President Trump invited Barron Trump's friend, Aiden Ross, who is a YouTuber. He came to Mar-a-Lago and conducted an interview with President Trump. Aiden Ross is 20 years old. And he asked the questions that millennials wanted to know. And it was a very enjoyable interview to watch. There was a lot of good-natured joking going around. And Aiden Ross was a very composed and very confident young interviewer. And that interview has now been watched by 2.4 million people, mostly, I would think, young people. So Trump is doing all the right things. He is going to meetings of blacks. He is reaching out to Hispanics. He is reaching out to young people. And then he is reaching out to people in the middle, independents who feel that the Democratic Party has left them, like Elon Musk. Elon Musk went to Mar-a-Lago last Monday and had an interview with Trump. And ladies and gentlemen, it has been seen by a staggering 1 billion with a B. 1 billion people have watched that 2.5-hour interview. And I watched a good portion of it myself. And Trump handled all the questions. He didn't dodge. He didn't weave. Not that he ever does. He met the questions very forthrightly and did an excellent job. Meanwhile, focus continues to be placed on Tim Walz's military history. And I watched the liberal mainstream media saying, oh, don't put him down. He served in the military for 24 years. But that's not the point, ladies and gentlemen. We're not denying him or depriving him recognition for serving in the Minnesota National Guard for 2 decades. Thank you for your service to our country. And I mean that sincerely, Governor. But what we're complaining about is his lying to the American people and saying that he was in combat, when the truth is that he retired from the National Guard when they told him he was going to be deployed and that he had to go into a combat zone, namely Iraq. Well, after 24 years, he decided to retire. And, you can draw your own conclusion about that. One conclusion is that 24 years is long enough. Another conclusion is that in your late 40s, early 50s, maybe you're too old to go into combat. But here's the thing. You don't then go out and lie about it. When you're running for vice president of the United States, you don't tell the American people that you served in combat and try and then accept the glory that goes along with people who actually have done that, like J.D. Vance. So Nikki Haley, I think, made an excellent point earlier this week. She went on Fox and said the Republicans better change their tune. They need to move on from Walz's military service and the fact that Kamala has not sat for an interview with any credible member of the media, even into the now almost a month as the Democratic nominee for president, for which she received 0 votes. But she's going to go to Chicago next week and be coronated the presidential nominee from the Democratic Party. And I think Ms. Haley, who I'm not a huge fan of, but nevertheless, I think she's smart. I think she is insightful. She said they better start talking about Kamala Harris's record. And I agree with her. Let's talk about her record as the border czar. Talk about her record as the second in command of the Biden White House and all of the failed policies. The failed policies that include runaway inflation, soaring gas prices, unemployment that is at the highest that it has been since Trump left office, and then all the skirmishes that have cropped up around the world. The Ukraine, using U.S.-made munitions to fire inside of Russia, like the Middle East, which is a powder keg with Tehran indicating that they are going to move on Israel, and the threat of China moving into Taiwan. It is a colossal mess, ladies and gentlemen. And I don't care what party you're affiliated with, whether you're conservative or Democrat. We don't want this country to be at war. We don't want rising crime rates. And we don't want to be lied to by our leaders. Enough is enough. Well, I want you to stay tuned today. We've got Alex Newman coming up, the CEO of Liberty Sentinel Media, and then a returning guest to the truth, Morgan Lerette. He wrote a book called Guns, Girls, and Greed, chronicling his time with Blackwater. And he's got some interesting observations on the attempted assassination of President Trump and what may lie ahead. We come to you, as you know, each Saturday beginning at noon on the John Fredericks Media Network, all up and down the East Coast, east of the Mississippi, from Memphis to Richmond, Philadelphia, and points in between, including my home city of Atlanta. And we also come to you on the CD Media platform. They have 13 digital outlets. They're investigative journalists who only care about the truth, and they have invited us to come on their platform. We're also live stream. Right now, you can watch us on Getter, Rumble, and YouTube Live. So I hope you'll come and join us there. And if I could ask you to consider doing just one small favor, if you would go to one of those sites, doesn't matter, Rumble, Getter, YouTube, and if you like what you hear and you like the programming that we put out every week, subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you do. It would be a big help to us, and it helps us get broader exposure on those platforms that look at the number of subscribers and the numbers of likes that we get in terms of where they display us on the menu. All right, so let's get right to our next guest. It's my pleasure now to welcome Alex Newman to the show. He is the CEO of Liberty Sentinel Media. He's a journalist, an author, and an educator. And I expect that he's going to do some educating for us today. Alex, welcome to The Truth.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So you've been writing a lot about the deep state, and let's just straight away, was the attempted assassination on President Trump coordinated? Was it deep state activity, in your opinion?
There's no question about it. I mean, I don't know exactly all the details yet. I don't think anybody does, except maybe those conspirators involved. But the idea that a 20-year-old punk outsmarted the most sophisticated personal protection service in the world is simply ludicrous. I think what we have here is Crooks was set up as a patsy somehow. Some plausible hypotheses that I think deserve to be explored. Was he a victim of MK Ultra style programming? Did he have FBI handlers, either confidential informants or agents? There's a lot of evidence to suggest that he did. Somebody did tracking of his cell phone through the Heritage program, and what they found was people with cell phones visiting him, then going to an FBI office or right next to an FBI office. There's a lot of questions there. I don't know the mechanism yet, but I suspect Crooks was set up somehow. I mean, he may have genuinely believed he was going to assassinate Trump and be some hero who stopped literally Hitler. But of course, I don't believe he was the real assassin. I believe the real assassin is still out there. And I do believe that Donald Trump was correct when he said that God preserved his life. I think they did try to take him out. They failed. And I don't think they're going to stop with that. I think they'll try again and again and again.
Well, I agree. Actually, I've spent an unhealthy amount of time looking at the assassination, which is actually how I learned about yourself. And I saw an interview that you did with one of the citizen journalists on the assassination, and I felt that your insights were right on. But the things that lead me to believe that it was coordinated is that the tracking that you indicated. There was an individual who visited Crooks' house 2, if not 3 times in the weeks leading up to the assassination attempt. And that individual's cell phone showed back up a day later in Gallery Square in Washington, where we know is a hotbed for government activity. The Secret Service is located there, the FBI, other government agencies, ATF. So it is very suspicious. It proves nothing, but it certainly provides a lot of smoke that deserves to be looked at much closer. Then the second thing that really disturbs me is that they knew of Crooks's presence in that venue for an hour and 20 minutes before the first shot was fired. Then they knew he was on the roof for 5 full minutes. And then we know that the local law enforcement reported a man on the roof a full minute and 15 seconds before the first shot was fired. That's plenty of time to pull Trump off the stage. And to me, I'm tired of hearing about the mistakes that were made that day. When do mistakes transcend into intentional action? And that's where I'm sitting right now.
I don't believe these were mistakes at all, right? Mistakes can be forgiven. Mistakes are okay. These were not mistakes. People had to go way out of their way to allow these things to happen. The protocols had to be broken over and over and over again. I actually spoke with a friend who used to serve high up in the U.S. Department of Justice, and he said this would be a real easy investigation to conduct. Find out who gave the order to leave that roof uncovered. And that's how you unravel this whole thing. Who gave the order? Okay, now we know you're involved. Who were you talking to?
There's one more piece that we have no information or data on. Why did the sniper allow Crooks to get off? The South Hercules team was trained on Crooks for a full minute before Crooks pulled the trigger the first time. I'm hesitating because you don't think Crooks pulled the trigger. I happen to.
I think he may have. I think he may have fired off some shots, but I don't think those were going to be the bullets that were going to hit him. They would never allow some 20-year-old punk with no sniper skills to be the lead guy on an Asian attempt. I think he was just supposed to be the fall guy. He took some shots, all the better, make it a little bit more credible looking. But that's based on what I've seen so far.
Well, where would the assassin have been, and who would it have been?
It's a good question, and I don't claim to have the answer to that. I've seen some really good analyses that looked at the possibility of the water tower and ruled that out. And so one hypothesis that I saw that I thought was interesting was there was that building right next to the building that Crooks was on, and there was a window right there. So the shots would have come from a very similar direction, not exactly the same. And I think whoever was in that window or near that window needs to be brought in for questioning under oath, with obviously the implications of perjury being explained to him very clearly.
Well, and I believe that the people that ostensibly occupied that position were local law enforcement snipers that were actually set up. We've seen their guns on tripods there. They are the ones who left their duty post in search of a suspicious person. I've said on the show last week, in fact, that if there was a suspicious person in the venue, wouldn't that make you hyper focused on maintaining your duty post? And clearly, had they done that, there's good reason to believe that they would have seen Crooks scale the wall to get up on the roof, and they could have eliminated him then. But taking all that aside, why did the South Hercules Sniper Secret Service team wait a full minute and I believe 10 or 15 seconds, allowing Crooks to fire off 8 rounds, and then they shot him?
It's a very good question. And the explanation that we've seen so far is that there was a tree in the way. If that is true, what kind of moron picked a spot that would leave a giant blind spot for a sniper to sit in? So again, all of these things defy explanation. And as the first Secretary of Defense said when they changed the Department of War over to the Department of Defense, quoted in a book by a U.S. senator, he said, "A consistency is never," and he was talking, of course, in the context of U.S. foreign policy, how it seems like almost every foreign policy action ended up bolstering the communists, weakening the United States, stabbing our allies in the back. And I think that's what we're dealing with here. When you have a whole bunch of mistakes, occasionally a mistake will be made in your favor. And yet here, all of these mistakes had to work perfectly for this to happen. It's just not plausible that we're dealing with innocent mistakes here.
Well, and to your point, the one place in that entire venue that someone could have taken up a sniper's position and gone reasonably undetected by the snipers for the Secret Service that were across the way would have been the exact location that took up. And you and I are 100% in agreement that it was just, I can't say too coincidental because neither of us believe it was a coincidence. It was too staged, too planned, too perfect. And then the last thing that convinces me that it was coordinated is the amount of disinformation that the government has put out. Like when Christopher Wray went before the House Judiciary Committee and said, well, we don't even know that he was shot with a bullet. It may have been shrapnel. What would possess someone to even say that, to marginalize or trivialize what had happened to the 45th president of the United States by making a statement like that? The only thing that it did for me is to destroy what little credibility Christopher Wray has left with me personally.
Christopher Wray and the entire FBI have no credibility anymore. The idea that they're going to lead this investigation is so utterly preposterous, and warned me that the deep state was going to try to assassinate Trump. I did an article about it at the time. It was published January 2nd of 2018. It was called Deep State Plan C is to Assassinate Donald Trump, warns advisor Roger Stone. And I called this, and one of the things he said was that you cannot have the FBI investigating this because, of course, the FBI has spent the last 8 years trying to destroy Donald Trump and everybody around him. They've raided his friends. They've imprisoned his friends. They've manufactured phony evidence to spy on Donald Trump. The idea that these people are going to lead the investigation is so utterly hard to imagine. But I think the reason why they did that is because they want to downplay this. They don't want people talking about the assassination attempt. You saw how quickly it disappeared from the media. First, they sent out the memo. Don't talk about this. Don't say it was an assassination attempt. We don't know what it was. You saw the ridiculous headlines from the fake news. MAGA world upset as Donald Trump entered in shooting event. Right? I mean, just ridiculous propaganda. And then they immediately got it out of the headlines. They immediately got it off of our television screens. And now we're back to fawning over Kamala Harris or whatever. They don't want us talking about this because they don't want us asking questions about this. They missed, they had their shot, they missed, and they will almost certainly come back again and try it again. But if they can downplay this, if they can minimize this, if they can get people thinking about other stuff, it makes their job a whole lot easier.
Well, I've never seen our country in the mess that it's in today, and do seriously think that the deep state is behind a large percentage of the things that are going wrong in our country. I had a respected national journalist tell me 2 years ago that there is not a single member of Congress that they believed was not corrupt or hiding some scandalous activity or somehow compromised that would lead them, compel them to vote the way that they are told to vote. And I thought at the time, that's really crazy. That really just, I just cannot imagine that every member of Congress, and they were quick to say, well, there are some few exceptions, but the majority, overwhelming majority of Congress are corrupt or hiding something, being blackmailed, and that they just go along to maintain their seat in Congress and vote as they are told. Does that resonate with you?
Oh, there's no question. That's one of the ways that they control everybody in Congress is through blackmail. And we've had people in Congress come out and talk about this, right? They invite them to the parties. They give them cocaine. They get them drunk. They get them to go sleep with some, 17-year-old girl or 16-year-old girl or 14-year-old boy. And then they're owned forever. Even if they, wait a minute, I don't want to participate in it. Oh, well, you'd hate for those pictures to be on the front page of your local newspaper, right? What would your wife think? What would your children think? And so a huge majority of Congress is controlled in this way. We know the NSA has been spying on them all. They've got all their emails and their phone calls and their text messages. They know all the dirty secrets. They know where all the bodies are buried. Of course, a lot of them, you don't even need to do that because they're so disgusting. They'll sell their soul. They'll sell their mother for money or for power. So unfortunately, we have a disgusting Congress right now that is a reflection of our degenerate country. Used to be until recently when the questions about the voting became so obvious you couldn't ignore them anymore. And it's very sad. I know a few people in Congress that I would say are decent people that may not be controlled. And over the years, there have been some, one that comes to mind who was murdered, of course, was Congressman Larry McDonald. He was a Democrat, a very conservative Democrat from Georgia. The Soviet Union shot down his airplane.
He represented the district just north of where I maintained my primary residence. I had a conversation with then Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, right after that happened. And I said, it's inconceivable to me that they would have killed Larry McDonald in the way that they did. It has to be the greatest irony of my lifetime that here is the leading opponent of communism and the biggest critic of the Soviet Union. We still had the Soviet Union at the time. And that they would take the other 175 or 250 people down with him. And Speaker Gingrich said, don't be surprised.
Yeah, it's horrible. And I suspect there was involvement there of our own intelligence agencies. How did the Soviets know? I have no doubt that subversive elements within our own government cooperated with that. And unfortunately, that's the reality, right? When you have a member of Congress with integrity that can't be blackmailed, that can't be bought, that can't be sold, then they go to draconian measures. Ron Paul was another good example of that. Congressman Ron Paul. They didn't have any dirt on him, so they couldn't blackmail him. They couldn't threaten him. And so what did they do? They tried to destroy his reputation in the media. Every nasty thing they could say. He's an anti-Semite. He's a Jew hater. He's a homophobe. Every nasty thing they could think of to say about him, they threw at him. And so that's what they do. If they can't control you, they work to destroy you.
Well, it's sad. I don't believe that politics is a tough game anymore. I think it is a corrupt game, and I think that it is one big system of dysfunction and probably beyond cronyism. I think you'd have to be really naive at this point to conclude anything else. But, the Democrats keep saying that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. And I hope that he will adopt my line that he is a threat to bureaucracy. And that's what we need to be able to clean this up. I don't know that anybody else could do it and that anybody's strong enough to do it. They clearly don't have anything on Donald Trump. If they did, they would have already thrown it at him. And I think he does care enough about our country that clearly he's willing to put his life on the very life on the line for it. Can he get the genie back in the bottle? Can we go to Washington in Trump's second term and clean this mess up?
I think you're absolutely right about the blackmail on Trump. They already deployed everything they had, right? Every scandal, real and imagined that they could think of. And now they're at the point where they just make stuff up, which is what they do when they don't have any genuine blackmail on you. So that's what they're doing now with Donald Trump. As to whether he can fix this or not, unfortunately, I don't believe America can be fixed by human power anymore. It has gone way too far. I do believe our country is already under God's judgment. And there aren't a whole lot of ways out of this. And I would encourage people, the Bible says, don't put your trust in princes, don't put your trust in men, put your trust in the Lord. And that's what we need to be doing as Americans. I like Donald Trump a lot. I know a lot of the people around him and like them very much. I respect them. I do believe they want what's best for our country. Of course, I have some policy disagreements with Trump. I think he made some pretty significant mistakes in his first term. I hope he won't make them in his second. But ultimately, I don't think America can be fixed by human power. If it is going to be fixed, and I say if because it's a big if, I don't think there's any guarantee, even if Donald Trump wins this election in a landslide, gets a Republican House and a Republican Senate, I don't think that's necessarily going to fix this country. But if it's going to be fixed, it's going to be fixed because Americans repented, stopped murdering babies, started paying attention to the Constitution, stopped mocking God on marriage and everything else, and stopped exporting this wickedness to the rest of the world. Short of that, I don't think America can be redeemed. I think Donald Trump kind of pushed the paused button on the controlled demolition of the United States and the shift over to the one world system. But that could resume with a vengeance right after his second term. And it could continue even during his second term. In fact, if you look at the Transition Integrity Project, this was a George Soros-funded project of the Podesta creeps and others to try to figure out what were the most likely scenarios in the 2020 election and how they would prepare for those. The one scenario where Donald Trump won a clear and unambiguous victory that they couldn't discredit was, hey, let's have Washington, Oregon, and California secede from the Union. Let's rip up the Constitution. Let's have the terror mobs go out and burn down their cities. So if Donald Trump wins in the second term, I think that's likely unless they steal it, which is also possible. But if by some chance Donald Trump wins this election and they cannot discredit that victory, what they will do, I know what they will do because we've seen them talk about it. They will have the terror mobs go out in the streets. They'll become ungovernable. They'll set our communities, especially black communities, on fire. They will burn stuff down. They will shoot at police. They will riot. They'll invite hostile foreign powers to meddle. They may even start a third world war, maybe nuke the United States, certainly crash the dollar, crash the real estate market, crash the stock market. So even if and when Donald Trump wins another election, the problems will continue. And it's going to be very difficult for Donald Trump to try to address that. It's going to be even more difficult for him to try to advance his agenda while the cities are on fire, the bottom is falling out from underneath the dollar, the next pandemic hits us, and they're threatening global vaccines and quarantines and all the rest. So I think it's going to be a rough few months ahead, probably longer. I don't think Donald Trump can fix it on its own, but we'll have to see where this goes. I encourage everybody to be in prayer about this, and I encourage everybody to be involved in this. Don't just sit back and listen or read. Get active in the process. Go find good candidates to support in the primary. Go find good candidates to support in the general, and get involved in your local community. If you haven't been doing that up until now would be a real good time to get started.
So, the woke agenda is just so mind-boggling to me, but the disappointing thing is that our country seems to be evenly divided, almost 48-48 with a few straggling independents around, but a good 48% of the country believes in this stuff that is so anti-American and anti-Christian. And you saw it work its way into the Olympics, which I was very pleased to see backfired spectacularly against the Olympics when they mocked the Last Supper with transgender individuals.
I think this gets back to really the crux of the issue. That's why my latest book is called Indoctrinating Our Children to Death: Government Schools War on Faith, Family, and Freedom, and How to Stop It. I don't believe there is any possibility of turning this country around unless we deal with this crisis in education, because they have been turning our children against God, against their families, against their country for generations, where children want to burn down their country. They don't know what bathroom to go into. They hate their parents. They think their parents have white privilege and cause global warming and all these other crazy things. And if we don't address the education system, see, the totalitarians, they've been playing the long game. We're out here fighting every election like our lives depend on it, because they do. They're over there brainwashing our kids to be revolutionaries and totalitarians. And, Andrew Breitbart used to say that politics is downstream from culture. He was absolutely right. Well, culture is downstream from education. If they continue to brainwash 85% of our children, in these government indoctrinations of society are now looking at this and saying, hey, if we don't get this education issue under control, there is no hope for fixing America. We may win this next election. We may push the tyrant another 10, 20, 30 years, but over the long term, we will lose if we don't take this seriously.
Well, I totally agree with you, and I think that people are starting to wake up, not woke wake, but conservative awakening, because I just saw a statistic this morning, in fact, that CNN, the Crisis News Network, viewership has gone from 123 million to 62 million in just the span of 2.5 years. CNBS has gone from 55 million to just over 20 million viewers. So I do think that's a positive. We also have learned in the recent days that half of Silicon Valley has moved towards Trump, and so many states have done election reform. Maybe, just maybe, we will be able to get a conservative in the White House and in the Congress, and we can get our country back in shape. Before I let you go, Alex, let's talk briefly about the economy. I have been a real critic of the Federal Reserve for the last 2 years, predicting that they would cast our country into a serious recession and that it would spiral out of control into a depression. Now I'm starting to think that maybe I was just flat out wrong. It looks like Jerome Powell may have actually balanced the high wire act that he's been engaging in, and that we're headed for a soft landing. What do you think?
I don't think we're headed for a soft landing. They may be keeping the house of cards together long enough so that they can blame this on something or someone that they don't like, somebody that they want to make the scapegoat. But I think the economic problems that we're dealing with right now are so massive that you almost can't overstate the enormity of the catastrophe that we're facing. The dollar is in huge trouble. And at the same time, the commercial real estate market is imploding. That's going to bring down so many of the banks. They're working now to undermine the entire stock market. If you've seen The Great Taking or read the book The Great Taking, you don't even own your securities anymore. They're preparing for an economic crisis of unbelievable proportions to rearrange the entire global financial system, to bring in central bank digital currencies, to completely loot what's left of the middle class in America. They've already shipped our jobs, our manufacturing, our industry to communist China. This is all by design. And I think the chickens are going to come home to roost at some point in the not too distant future. We've just got the latest news from the Treasury. 75% of our income taxes are going just to pay the interest on the ridiculous national debt, more debt than any entity in all of human history has ever had. I just saw the Treasury report a couple of months ago. They acknowledge $178 trillion worth of unfunded liabilities. Okay. You can't even contemplate that number. It is so huge. There's literally zero chance that the U.S. government will be able to pay that back unless they inflate the money until it's, Zimbabwe dollars, in which case they defaulted on their loans anyways, on their promises anyway. So we're headed into economic oblivion. It is going to hurt more than people can imagine. They may be able to keep the house of cards standing for another few months, maybe even another few years. I'll be surprised. But at some point, this whole thing is going to come crashing down, and the real winners will be the uber elites, the George Soroses, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the rest of the criminal cabal, the communist Chinese, the Russians, the BRICS, etc. And we're watching right now the controlled demolition of the United States, not just economically, but militarily, spiritually, in every possible way. And of course, this is all part of the elitists' plan. We'll see whether they are able to pull it off, but that's what they're working toward. I think there are ways to prevent some of the worst horror, but it'll take, first of all, a good understanding of the problem. People have to understand, what is the Federal Reserve? How does it work? Where does it come from? And then they have to understand that we need to go back to sound money, and that it took generations to get us in this mess. It's going to take at least that long to get us out.
So in the great taking, you're really referring to what you've alerted me to in watching your podcast and listening to your radio program, that our brokerage accounts now have a provision that they're a security entitlement. Is that correct? Is that the right term that
That's
you've
right.
expressed?
Yep.
And so
So
what is the defense to that? Does that mean that we cash our securities in and get paper stock certificates and put them under a mattress, or bury them in the backyard, or maybe go to a safe deposit box? I don't know.
Unfortunately, you can no longer get paper stock certificates. They phased those out. So starting back in the 90s, they changed under the Uniform Commercial Code the laws governing security ownership, and you no longer own securities. You now have what's called a security entitlement. And what's happening is all these brokerages, all these brokerage houses are using your securities, or what you thought were your securities, your stocks, et cetera, as collateral for the $400 trillion plus derivatives complex that's going to burn down the global economy here soon. And so when you go to try to cash out whatever your securities are worth, they're going to say, oh, sorry, those are encumbered right now. We'll have to wait and see how this works its way through the courts. So I don't know what the solution is, financial advice, but I'm pretty bearish. I recommend people look seriously at rural land, bullets, and long-term storable food, because I think we're in for a pretty wild ride here, John.
Alex Newman, the CEO of Liberty Sentinel Media. Where can we find you?
LibertySentinel.org is my website. Sentinel is Sentinel. You can sign up for my free newsletter there. I also serve as senior editor of the New American Magazine. I contribute regularly to publications around the world, including the Epoch Times. And you can find me on X, Alex Newman _JOU.
Well, it has really been a privilege, and I'm glad I found you. I'm glad I discovered you. And maybe you'll cross paths with us down in West Palm Beach sometime. It'd be a pleasure to meet you in person.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be on here, and hopefully our paths will cross in person in the not too distant future.
Thank you, Alex. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. God bless you.
We're fortunate to have Morgan Lerette back. He's been on The Truth once before. We were talking about his book, Guns, Girls, and Greed, and his days with Blackwater, where he was stationed for 2.5 years in Iraq. So, Morgan, welcome back.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Man, a lot has happened since you were here, and most notably, an attempted assassination on Donald Trump on July the 13th, which we're determined to keep in the public eye. The mainstream media is not talking about it. They're hoping that it will be swept under the rug. My prediction is that no one will be held accountable for it. They think that because they took out crooks, that's the end of it. And then they offered up the head of the Secret Service as a sacrificial lamb. That's my perspective. What are your thoughts? So do you think that this was a lone, crazed 20-year-old gunman who certainly planned with precision?
I think it's a confederacy of dunces, but I do think there was one gunman. If there were two gunmen, I don't think President Trump would be alive today. And I tell you that because I worked for Blackwater, and that's what we did was personal protection. And the first thing that you do is you always look at a map and you look at where you have the high ground and where somebody else can get the high ground. The Secret Service did not do that.
The Secret Service had a map. I've seen it. And it's a perfect pie chart or pie design of the venue, except where the American Glass Research Building is intentionally excluded from the protected area.
Which is insane because it's what, 15, 20 feet up in the air? That's a perfect shooting platform for anybody that wants to be on top of it.
And the water tower behind it would have been a perfect spot for the Secret Service to have observed the entire venue.
Yeah, when that guy got on the roof to try to assassinate Trump, the first thing he should have seen was a counter sniper team that was already stationed up there. And the fact that they didn't do this is either malintent or complete idiocy. And my assumption is that it's idiocy because they did not give Trump the A team, right? They gave him the B team or the C team. Anybody that they didn't want to have on Biden or Harris, they gave to Trump. And those guys cut a lot of corners.
Well, and when does cutting corners become an overt act? And it appears to me that enough corners were cut that it is no longer a series of mistakes that just lined up to allow crooks to come in and take his shot and then get taken out. But it appears to me that it was planned, coordinated, and by design. That's just my own conclusion based on well over 100 hours of research and reading and looking into the attempt on President Trump's life. And it's really offensive to me. It would not matter to me if he was the head of the Democratic ticket or an independent ticket, or if we had a viable American Communist Party, it would not be acceptable to me to take out a political opponent. This is the United States of America, for God's sakes. We're not supposed to behave that way. But it seems to be an all too familiar same chapter, second verse to me.
No, I agree. If there was anybody, it was still a huge failure. And there was so much missed, and so many emails have come out now saying that they asked it for additional support and it kept getting denied. So at some point, you have to assume that it goes from stupidity to malintent, and heads need to roll. When I worked for Blackwater, if we would have let somebody up on a rooftop that could have taken a pot shot at the ambassador to Iraq, we would have been fired on the spot. Instead, everybody's sitting here blaming each other. And this is what the government does. The Secret Service blames the local police. The local police blame the Secret Service. You know, the head of the Secret Service is going to sit there and point at anybody she can. It's like that Spider-Man meme where they're all pointing at each other, right? Like, this is what they do, and then nobody gets held accountable. It's why we can't win wars, and it's why we can't protect the president.
So they've led 2 fake impeachments, 4 prosecutions against Trump. They then every time they carried out one of these falsities, it backfired on them and Trump climbed in the polls. It seemed that to me, and Tucker Carlson said it before I did, he was willing to utter the words that I was not, that assassination was the only thing left. And so they tried it and they failed. What's next?
I mean, now that you have all eyes on it, it's going to make it a heck of a lot harder to do. But to your point, if you cross the U.S. government, which, you know, Trump has done, they have as much of your money as they can spend to go through the process of prosecuting you. They will find the crimes. They did this with Blackwater in 2007. They're doing it with Trump now. They will ruin a person's life just by going through the legal system, which needs to be fixed. So what's next? I think what's next is now they're going to sentence him on September 18th, and they're going to sentence him to jail and see if that works. I think it's going to backfire, but that's what I see happening.
Well, so is there a sentencing hearing on September the 18th? I thought it had been suspended indefinitely. Is this some breaking news now?
I read it today that they were talking about a sentencing hearing on the 18th. So maybe they moved it and I didn't know, but
Well, I'm not sure. It's the first I've heard of September the 18th, but I'm telling you that if these people want to devolve this country into civil war, I think that would be the final shot that would do it. To take the leading candidate for president of the United States and put him in jail for a phony, trumped up charge, no pun intended, is beyond maddening. And at some point, the American people just aren't going to take it anymore, don't you think?
oh, I agree. And I think the last thing you want to do is create a civil war where you have the liberals against the conservatives. I spent enough time in the military with Blackwater to know that a lot of those people are conservative. And a lot of the people you see that are out there barnstorming Columbia University probably haven't even touched a gun and are scared of what it might do if they got near it. So that's the last thing you want is to pit one side versus the other when one side is actually, war weary and has had to do this overseas compared to the people that have grown up with a silver spoon in their mouth and get to complain at Harvard and Columbia and all those places most people don't even get to see.
So, Morgan, have we just been living under a rock for the last 50 years? Has the world been this evil, bad place that we're starting to see it emerge to be? Or is this a new phenomenon?
I mean, there was always the underpinnings, especially when you look at the Middle East and Iran with Israel and Hamas and Hezbollah. Those have always been simmering, even in the Muslim community, the Sunnis versus the Shias. But when you put a leader in charge of the free world that everybody understands is not able to make decisions, it opens up a window for people like Iran, the Iranian government, to say, now's our time to be able to do this. It lets China know, hey, if we're going to take Taiwan, now's our time to do this. We're not going to have any negative repercussions. So what you're seeing is that boiling point essentially was found when President Biden came in, and then everything he's done has been toothless, even back to Syria in 2008 with Obama. Maybe it was 2010, whatever the heck it was, but Biden and Obama said, don't cross that red line, and then they did. And nothing bad happened. They know that they can do it with complete immunity right now.
Well, I think that's a reflection on what Trump has been saying for a long time, and that is the current administration's weakness. And I don't know if it's weakness, incompetence, and to some extent, I think it's just sheer outright laziness. There is a video on Instagram that I just saw today of the Taliban parade, and they're showing off all the military armament that was left when we pulled out of Afghanistan in an uncoordinated, unplanned, helter-skelter kind of way that resulted in 13 American men and women losing their lives, servicemen and women. And then we were fed the lie that, oh, all the military equipment was dismantled or rendered ineffective. Well, how are they motoring these tanks and the Black Hawk helicopters that we see in the Taliban parade today if they were disabled?
Yeah, no, I've driven in those things, and I can tell you right now that they are not easy to work on. It's not a 1973 Ford truck where you can go and change some spark plugs. They are highly complex and digital type machines. So the fact that they're driving them around tells us that they were given over to the Taliban in good and fine working condition, which is insane. Especially when you look at now, not ISIS, but Al Qaeda is coming back, and what Taylor Swift's concert was going to be attacked. You see in the British media where you have the immigrants that are going around and stabbing people. We've created an environment where terrorism and bad state actors, I say we, I mean Biden, but bad state actors and terrorists can now kind of work with impunity, and it's international. And that's the problem that we're running into is the people that are running this country want to put an international lens on how do you make everything equal across the globe. It's never going to happen, but there's going to be a lot of people that die when you try.
So what do you recommend President Trump do to take care of his own safety? I know you were deployed for almost 2.5 years in Iraq. How long were you with BlackRock in addition to that?
I wish I was with BlackRock. Those guys are making all kinds of money with the Green New Deal. So I was with Blackwater for 18 months in 2004 through 2005. And the problem is that the principal will tell you where to go, but they are not the expert in how to set up security around that. That's why you have the Secret Service. Now, if I was Trump, I would bring in the Navy SEALs. Traditionally, they have been the ones that have done private security at a military level and say, I want you to stand next to this Secret Service guy that's in charge and tell him where he's screwing up. And I want that to be fixed. Now, maybe it's not a SEAL. Maybe it's a retired Navy SEAL because he doesn't have, he's not the commander in chief yet. But bring somebody in that can look at this from a lens of combat instead of a lens of everything's fine. We're just in rural Pennsylvania.
Well, the Gordon model would be to find that retired Navy SEAL or someone retired from Blackwater who could be the point person, who could be President Trump's personal representative that oversees the security at every event that he goes to and coordinates or at least shadows the Secret Service and the police. And then if there is a weakness, if the next AGR building is left out of the circumference, that they say, stop, we're not going on stage until that hole is plugged and that this is fixed.
Yeah, and if President Trump's hiring, I'm available. But you're absolutely right. But I would actually extend it out and say you probably need 5 to 10 of those retired Navy SEAls, something along those lines, because the one person can direct people where to go, but they can't confirm that everybody's going where they need to be at any given moment. So that's where I think you need a team.
Well, why not call up your old boss, Eric Prince, and have him be in charge of Trump's security?
I mean, that wouldn't be a bad idea. We never lost a principal over in Iraq in the entire time Blackwater was over there. So Eric Prince is probably a good guy to call after Trump calls me. I'll call Eric.
Well, that is a very commendable record, and I don't know how this happens, but it needs to happen, whether it is through Eric Prince or someone that is like Eric Prince or yourself that could have his own private oversight of the security. Because, I happen to know some of the Secret Service people that are on his protection detail, and I have zero reason to believe that they're not the most upstanding, fine people and risking their lives every day for the president. But they're not the ones that caused this debacle. It's whoever designed that security plan and left the building unprotected, left the roof unprotected, didn't have somebody on the water tower overlooking the entire venue. And just, I'm not a security person, but the first thought that entered my mind is what you said, take the high ground, put somebody there that can oversee the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think the problem with the Secret Service, and you saw it with the State Department, there's a reason why Blackwater was hired to protect these diplomats. It's because the Secret Service, the State Department, they look at things through a lens where you are safe and you're worried about something close happening. Combat vets like me, we look at distance. We know distance, we know direction, we know angles, and they are probably not trained to do that. I'm not saying that they can't. I'm saying that when you assume everything is going to be safe, you cut corners. When you assume everything is going to go wrong, you absolutely don't. And that's where Blackwater made its money over in Iraq.
So what are you doing with your time these days now that you have authored your book and it has been out? I hope you're making some scratch from it, Guns, Girls, and Greed. How are you spending your time?
Well, I still have a day job. I haven't been able to retire yet, but one of these days. So I work in IT during the day, and then, I write articles and go on shows like yours as often as possible to kind of talk through current events.
Well, thank you for coming on, and we certainly appreciate everything that you've done for our country and you continue to do. And let's pray and do everything that we can to get Donald Trump reelected in just 60 days now. And hopefully we can stop the madness and get our country back on the right track.
Yeah, and if you're at one of his events and you see something, say something. Don't be the person that says, "Oh, there's somebody over there. I shouldn't mention it." Mention it. It's that time.
Well, that takes you back to Butler County, and it was ordinary citizens who saw the shooter before law enforcement or the Secret Service did. So I think your advice is very pertinent. Morgan Lerette, thank you so much for coming on The Truth, and we hope you have a nice rest of your weekend.
You too. Thanks, Sean.
Welcome to this week's edition of The Truth. We've got a lot to talk about.
You've been listening to The Truth with John Gordon. To connect with John and get more of The Truth, follow and subscribe to @JohnGordonTruth on Getter, Rumble, X, Facebook, and YouTube. The Truth with John Gordon is a production of John Gordon and the John Fredericks Media Network. All rights reserved.